Hello everyone, it's Rob here. Listen, it's YouTube. You know what to do. Hit the bell and the thumbs up, right? Okay, I'll talk to you later. Bye. There was this incident, and then I remember the flotilla incident. Does anyone remember this? There was an aid flotilla that they sent into Gaza trying to break the blockade, trying to deliver resources to people in Gaza against the blockade. They had pocket knives, that's right. And I remember at the time hearing about this before they sent it, and I heard all about the flotilla and what they were putting together, and I was kind of following this for the first time, and then seeing what the result was, seeing how these people that were putting together this flotilla and trying to like deliver vital supplies to people in Gaza, the way that they were just like indiscriminately killed, and then the way that the media was complicit in that. That was really the first time when I noticed that big split in between like the reality is what I observed and then what was being reported in the media, and noticing that big like gulf and just being like, whoa, like what is this? It was really one of those things that made me start questioning this and realizing the extent to which that Israel and also America and Canada gets their like genocidal and violent legacy gets completely whitewashed through the media. Because you can see when you see the disconnect between the reality and the way it was covered.
Israeli forces stormed at least one ship attempting to break the blockade of Gaza. Commanders lowered themselves from the helicopters and onto the Mavi Marmara. That's the lead ship in a flotilla of 6 vessels which are carrying aid for the Palestinian territory. We can confirm that at least 2 people have been killed and more than 30 have been injured. Israeli radio is reporting the death toll may be as high as 16 people. Well, our reporter on board the ship sent this report before communications were cut.
The organizers on board the Mavi Marmara, after 2 people have been confirmed killed by the Israeli army, have now asked all the passengers to go inside. They've raised the white flag. This after Israeli commandos descended upon the ship in international water.
International waters, these were not terrorists, these were not soldiers, they were people bringing supplies. Just a very deliberate, like, violent war crime in full view of everyone, in full view of the media. And just, again, it just got covered in the media, and the IDF said, well, they had weapons, they were bringing weapons to Gaza. Look at this, we found a bunch of, like, knives and shit on there, so it was justified. And the media just went, yep, no, okay, so the IDF said it was justified, so that's what happens. That's what happens, and they were right, they have a right to defend themselves. Listen, Israel has a right to defend itself. And that was the reaction from both political leaders and people in the media. And I was just like, okay, what the fuck is going on? This is so weird.
From a helicopter, as well as surrounded it by vessels from all sides. Tens of people, civilians, have been injured. There are still sounds of live fire despite the white flag being raised. Tens of people have been injured. 2 people have been killed on board the ship, which holds 600 activists, parliamentarians, women, children, and the elderly, all of whom are civilians. Organizers have asked everyone to go inside.
These were not soldiers. Here's Norman.
Story now and get further reaction from America as we go live to New York, where I'm now joined by political scientist Norman Finkelstein. Mr. Finkelstein, many thanks for joining us. Now, we've had widespread condemnation in Europe so far at the actions of the Israeli Defense Force when they boarded the aid ship flotilla. But what has been the reaction over in America?
So far, there's been a pretty mild statement by President Obama regretting what happened.
Yeah.
Saying it should be investigated, but not going beyond that. I would call it a mild display of concern.
So just a mild display of concern then. But Jerusalem has said that it was just trying to protect its borders and its citizens, and that the flotilla was actually on a mission to discredit the state of Israel. What do you say to that?
Israel attacked a humanitarian convoy in international waters. They used armed commandos to attack an international...
Shooting at them from the helicopter.
I should say a humanitarian convoy in international waters. I think everyone can agree that there's no possibility, there's no way to justify using armed force against what were clearly unarmed humanitarians trying to relieve an illegal siege of Gaza.
Just wondering though, RT. What does the R stand for in that, in RT? Because I don't know. Oh my goodness. I don't want to alarm anyone. Oh my gosh. I'm spreading disinformation again. Because if Russia says that when Israel kills a bunch of peace activists and civilians trying to deliver food and medicine to Gaza, if they're saying that's bad, then because they're the devious Russians, that it must mean that that stuff is good. Yeah, it was exactly like how the buildings that were bombed had Hamas in them. Exactly. It was the exact same justification. Again, it was in international waters. It was civilians and peace activists in international waters. Just a very clear and flagrant crime, war crime. It's just open and shut case, right? And this was basically talked about in Western media, just like, well, the IDF said that there were bad guys there, so no big deal. Israel, and then we heard the same thing then that we're still hearing today. Israel has a right to defend itself. Remember? We hear this every time this cycle of violence picks up again. And people like Joe Biden and Justin Trudeau, they love to say this. Israel has a right to defend itself. That's what they were saying in 2014 after this fucking massacre. And that's what they're still saying now. They're still saying it now. And this was just kind of the first incident where I really noticed this. The disconnect is because of blackmail. I don't think it's because of blackmail. I think it's just because Israel, as a violent settler colonialist society, has the full support of the United States government and the Canadian government because we're violent settler colonialist societies as well. And we have shared economic interests. And Israel allows the sort of Western colonialist powers to have a foothold in this region, and that's why we support them. It's not a big secret. It's not a conspiracy. That's why it happens. But this was the first time that I really noticed this disconnect, though. Finkelstein talks about this stuff as well, too, about like how like the media in Israel covers all this stuff, and how they're like the constant debate in Israeli media is like, who are we going to invade now? Like, who should we bomb Iran? Should we bomb Lebanon? Should we bomb Syria? This is like a constant, like what's being debated like on Israeli like TV. I was seeing if I could find any like CNN coverage of this, just as an example of this kind of disconnect. Here's Mike Pence himself on CNN. When you want to talk about the crimes of the Israeli government and you're CNN, these so-called liberal news media, who do you bring on to talk about that? How about Mike Pence?
Welcome back. We follow this guy on Twitter when he's not in the well of Congress making a speech or out on campaign trails helping various causes.
Israel's blockade of Gaza bolsters peace in the region.
Pence, chairman of the House Republican Conference. Christ. That makes you the number 3 in the House Republicans.
What is this suit? Mike Pence, I mean, to say nothing of the fucking disgusting thing, whatever he's about to say. What is this, like, 2004 NBA draft class ass suit he's got on here? What is this? He looks like the kid in Big after he shrinks. He's wearing the suit and then he shrinks and he's walking away in that oversized suit. It's a David Byrne ass suit. What is this? Mike Pence, you're absolutely failing this fit check. Disgracefully. Zoot suit looking ass. It is one of these situations, yeah. My God. Mike, get it together.
You know what? We're going to follow the lead of our viewers. They want to know about Israel. And I know that's something you know a lot about on the various committees. You've been over there many times. You've talked directly with the Palestinians, Egyptians, Israelis. And it's this whole idea about what is happening in Gaza. Israel attacks or gets on or tries to stop these ships. It leads to a mess.
This is what I mean about the shift that we're seeing now, though. And Israel commits this brutal war crime in front of everyone. Who do you bring on to talk about it? Well, how about like a fucking neoconservative evangelical Christian Zionist to break down the situation? This is who you have on to talk about this situation. Now, at least, even though mainstream media still sucks and still is bad at covering this issue, there is still a huge shift that has happened where they're actually bringing on actual Palestinians to talk about this situation. Like, this was unheard of even like a couple years ago.
Do the right thing?
Well, look, and thanks for having me on, Drew. Yeah, no one likes to see the loss of life. No one likes to see military confrontation, but
I think
Israel
you do
has
like
a
it,
right
Mike.
of self-defense.
There it is.
And the reality is...
There it is. We're still hearing it.
Gaza is essentially
an
isolated...
And look, they're showing the IDF propaganda video in the background. Look, soldiers because they're descending from their helicopter with their fucking machine guns. And look, soldiers are being hit with metal poles and chairs. This is how they justified this. Because lo and behold, when in international waters, when these armed men descend from helicopters onto these buildings, these people didn't just immediately fucking roll over and just let them do whatever they wanted, but they actually hit them with metal poles and chairs. And this justifies the fucking massacre that then took place afterwards. So Israel has a right to defend itself, but the people, the peace activists on this boat, do not have the right to defend themselves with fucking metal poles against armed men with carrying machine guns.
The reality is that Gaza is essentially an isolated, smaller version of a terrorist state. It launched lethal attacks against Israeli civilians in the form of thousands of rockets. And this blockade has saved
the Flotilla
lives.
Massacre. I think
the focus
you
now is the incident on Monday.
This is sick.
Looking into that, and
again, this
will
is
all be discussed. But
this is what CNN is doing to cover this incident. You're talking to, again, a neoconservative, evangelical Christian Zionist, and in case that's not enough, let's also put some IDF propaganda just going in the B-roll in the background. Like that's absolutely fucking sickening.
But, those of us that believe we need to stand with Israel during this time of crisis, believe that preserving the blockade and standing with Israel in her right of self-defense is imperative in this moment. And let's be clear, there's not a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Israel allows to be transferred or transfers 10,000 tons of humanitarian aid into Gaza every week. I mean,
definitely someone that you want to hear from this about what does and does not constitute a humanitarian crisis. Someone who believes in like fucking gay conversion therapy and like willingly let people, residents of his state, contract HIV and AIDS.
Hospitals are fully stocked. The food markets are fully stocked. This flotilla was embarked on a mission to challenge the blockade. Security forces, Israeli Defense Forces, challenged it. And violence ensued, but ultimately Israel has a right to defend itself.
Congressman, you've been in Congress, this is your fifth term?
Yes, sir.
Right? Fifth term? You've seen various peace efforts come and go. It's been so frustrating for decades now. And once again, it seems we are on the verge of restarting these peace talks, and yet another issue develops where the whole issue flares up again. Are we ever going to get to a place where the Palestinians, where Hamas, will be in a position to negotiate with Israel? Or if we truly want to get some relief to the Palestinians who are stuck in Gaza, should we not be talking about getting rid of Hamas?
Well, let's make a very careful distinction between the Palestinian Authority and the terrorist organization of Hamas. Part of the reason behind this blockade, Drew, is to prevent the flow of arms to the extent they can into Hamas, so Hamas can begin again to use Gaza as a platform for attacks against Israel. You know, there would be a pathway forward for a peace agreement with Israel. It would be very simple. That if the Palestinians...
Again, they're using this very, very clear war crime, this massacre against unarmed people in international waters. And who's the bad guy? Hamas. We got to what does this mean about Hamas? This is just evidence that we need to get rid of Hamas, all this, isn't it? It's so fucking sick. Like, it's cool that it's good and encouraging that I think there's some progress being made on this. And this was how Western media covered these events up until very, very recently, even I would say throughout the Trump era.
Palestinian leadership would recognize unequivocally Israel's right to exist, and essentially, if it would initiate an effort to dismantle terrorist infrastructure within all the areas under their control. I mean, the reality here is that while Israel is often demonized by the international community, the Palestinian leadership has it in their authority today under the rubric of the old roadmap that we all understand so well. To embrace just a couple of basic truths in the public debate and that would facilitate, I believe, a durable peace. But until that happens, then I think we need to stand by our most cherished ally, Israel, and we need to stand by her ability to defend herself.
Anyway, I was interested in seeing some Western coverage of how that flotilla incident was covered, and I was not disappointed by that. That's pretty much significantly worse than what I imagined we would find on that.